Hello.
Hello.
It was a long time since I've seen you again. This has been the most interrupted
I know.
episode of As the
You
Actress
feeling
and
better?
the Critic.
You're feeling better though.
Yeah, I was absolutely felled by a bug that completely took me by surprise. I was feeling very well and bouncing around. And then suddenly last Saturday, it just came down with this streaming cold, but not a streaming cold you could work through or anything. And I was convinced it was COVID.
Yeah.
And it wasn't, apparently. I mean, I did endless tests. I sort of got up at every time we did a COVID test. But
Yeah.
it is nasty. I've lost my sense of smell. I still feel chesty and I still feel ill. So that, yeah, very odd week being ill. I haven't been out again. That's 2 weeks without going out. And how about you? You're not in your usual setting.
I'm not in my usual setting. I'm in a hotel in Ireland. Um, yeah, not working this weekend. So, but there are I'm in Belfast, which I've never been to before, and I love it.
Oh, that's good.
Really love it. The weather has been amazing. The locations are extraordinary. Um, and yeah, everyone's just so gorgeous. I've never been to Northern Ireland before.
No,
You?
normally, no, no, not at all, ever.
Yeah.
I would like to go. And yeah, oh, well, that's very exciting. So it's
Yeah.
really you on this episode of As the Actress Said to the Critic, with me, the critic, Sarah Crompton.
And with me, the actress Nancy Carroll.
And we thought we would continue our sort of much postponed sort of question time, which we might keep doing because we've got lots of.
Yeah.
But one thing I wanted to talk about was food, which always is very much on my mind. And I was wondering, Nancy, when you perform, so like I know with dancers there's a whole sort of pattern to their day about when
Yeah.
they, and every dancer does a slightly different thing, and some people eat early and some people eat late. As an actress, do you act hungry or do you act full, and how do you cope with the whole business of, yeah,
Uh, I'm not somebody that relishes being hungry. I think that there has to be like a happy point where you're not hungry, but you're not slowed down by digestion. Um, I'm quite a little and often person.
right,
It's quite hard on a two-show day. I think that some people spend quite a lot of time deliberating over what is the perfect meal for a two-show day. I'm always amazed by particularly younger actors who go out and get like burger and chips.
right, brilliant,
How can you do that? It also depends on the costume, if you're in a corset or if or if you've got to be particularly active. Um, it, yeah, it's a constant thing. I think it is. I think it's production specific.
right. Oh, that's interesting. And do you
And
eat?
also company specific, because sometimes actually there's a real joy in eating together.
Right.
And actually in rock and roll, we had big company meals between shows because we just loved each other's company, and that was fab.
Yeah. And do you do that thing of going out after at the end, or do people just go home and sort of, yeah, fall into bed? I mean, and so I suppose, because my entire vision of the acting life is conditioned by novels of the 1930s, where
Yeah.
people kind of live in digs and then all eat together and
Yeah.
kind of, always make each other picnics. Um, does that sort of go on, or not?
Definitely. There's a lot of because you're adrenalized as much as anything, and you're seeing friends, but because your main activity of the day is sort of from about 4 o'clock to 11 o'clock, your entire body shifts. So it's a weird sort of jet lag.
Mm.
Um, but going out after the show, I think because since I've hit menopause, I can't eat as much late. We used to go out for massive meals, but then if I eat late, I just don't sleep, which is really dull. But yeah, going out afterwards is lovely. It's a real joy because you've done your work. So it's a bit magical. It's a bit like you've been let out for the week, it's sort of there's a buzz because you're doing it at the wrong hours. But you've done the show, you come off stage, you've done a day's work, and yeah, we're creatures of the night. There's something quite exciting about it, which never diminishes.
Right. I
Enjoy that.
must say that in my uh early journalistic career, when the I was on the Telegraph and we moved to Docklands and we had a press day on a Thursday, I think it was. It might have been Wednesday, but it was when we put an awful lot of pages to bed. It was Thursday because we had all the film pages for the
Right.
Friday, and then we had a supplement for Saturday, and it was a massive job. And we always, after that, we used to go out to, before Docklands got quite as built up as it now is, and there used to be able to go and sit on the water, and that had exactly that feeling of, we've done our jobs, we're having a nice time, we're all sitting together. And
Yeah.
it stopped happening after a bit. It got more built up, and deadlines changed, and we all had children or whatever, and couldn't do that thing. But I do have that kind of really fond memory of just sitting with people I was very fond of and liked working alongside, and yeah, and eating and drinking in the falling light. It was very, really nice.
But there's something quite ritualistic about it, isn't it? It's breaking bread.
Yeah.
I think there's something about the trust and community of that then plays into a working team relationship. And whatever the work is, if you've all sat down and eaten together, there's something mutually comforting, um, and not to be underestimated,
Yeah.
really. I think that, I mean, I've always tried to, as much as I can along the way, particularly in a play where you have to be quite horrible to each other. I think it's even more important to break bread.
Yeah.
And because you're going, this is a job. No, there will be no malice in this relationship. And we all commit to saying the words that somebody else has written, but nothing comes from a dark place. Because there's something about muscular repetition that can play with the sort
Yeah.
of boundaries
Yes.
of over time. So you have to remind yourself that these people are not spitting venom. It's okay.
Yeah. No, I think that's true. And I actually think, I always hope, young journalists still do it. Yeah, Precious in the office are so different. And I do hope that they get those moments where they can just sit there and have fun and talk about things that aren't their job, because I think it enriches how you work. And you're absolutely right, it improves relationships within a workplace,
Yeah.
enormously, really. I mean, there are sort of, when I was first came to London, there were sort of legendary stories of liquid lunches on Fleet Street, and I caught the very tail end of that because I used to work at IPC on at King's Reach Tower, and
Yeah.
you'd be able to walk across to Fleet Street and sort of see all the people having lunch at the wine press.
Yeah.
And that
Yeah.
was a bit more scary. I don't know how productive it was, but equally it was a kind of, people let off tension and so on. But
But it
that
used to be that,
that stopped really quite soon after I'd started journalism. It became much more about drinking water at lunch and working hard.
yeah. But I mean, it's an entire culture, isn't it? I mean, it was sort of representative of an entire culture because people used to go to the bar at the National in the interval and have a pint, and it was a whole different thing. Or there'd be a bottle of wine in a dressing room that people might have during the show. Or it was just very, very different times. And I mean, we can look back at it with a sober head and go, oh my gosh, how terrible. But it sometimes there was a sort of ease, and I can remember years and years ago, my dad is a graphic designer, and he was working, there was a huge overhaul of the Observer at some point, can't remember when, and he was redoing their logo and their layout, and I can't remember when this is, probably 35 years ago maybe. And he was, and at that point it was sort of pre-desktop publishing, it wasn't on computers, it was all still glue and paper at that point,
Yeah.
and laying it all out, and everybody had a fag stuck to their lip. And
I love those days. I love
yeah,
smoking.
but he said it was really sort of front page, it was
Yeah.
something out of a movie.
Yeah.
But there was a sort of ease of teamwork and an ease of thinking, and people worked so swiftly, and it was like a sort of dream machine.
Yeah.
And you adjust, and you take on board the new generation of what's okay and what's not okay, and new language and new technology and everything else, and people find another way. But there's, there's something to be said for that. There's sort of the madness of it and the edge of it, and I think sometimes the tiredness and the slightly frayed brain gives you an economy of thought that can help in those sorts of situations. I mean, I always say to younger actors, there isn't, being exhausted on stage isn't necessarily a bad thing. Economy of thought, leaving yourself alone,
Yeah.
can give you a sort of just a clarity.
Yeah.
There's clarity in that sometimes, and
Yeah.
yeah.
That's interesting. And when you're on stage and eating, we've talked a bit about that, but how do people work out those meals that people have to, when a play's based around a meal or people are eating meals,
Yeah.
is how edible or inedible is that food? Or again, does it just, what's the most
Well,
inedible food you've ever had on stage?
the thing that comes to mind, it was a play that Joe did, which was an American play called The Big Meal.
Right.
Michael Boyd directed, with brilliant people, Diana Quick and James Corrigan, and lots of fantastic, Kirsty Bushell, and the each meal was representative of somebody dying.
Right.
It was all set around family meals, but the meal itself was handed to the person who was about to pass.
Oh gosh.
And the way that they designed it, Michael designed it, I can't remember who did the actual design, but was that all the food was dyed to look like sort of Disney Technicolor.
Right.
So that it would be like bright red or bright yellow. And I think they all really suffered with that. And also because they were big piles of food and they had to scoff them.
Right. Oh my God.
Whereas I've only ever eaten sort of tidbits on stage, really.
It
Uh,
must be really hard if you're eating food that looks disgusting. Actually, that must be
yeah,
really.
yeah, really hard. And I can't remember else. I'm sure I've told this story before, that when I was doing The Magistrate, there was a bit where we'd been out in the town all night, and we'd been taken into this police station, and we were suddenly being released from a cell, but we hadn't eaten, and we'd be given a plate of biscuits. And the idea was that we start eating these biscuits because we're so hungry. And then my husband comes in, and I'm so angry that I spit this big lump of biscuit across the stage. But of course, biscuits are actually incredibly dry.
Yeah, yeah.
And by this stage, we'd been on stage for quite a long time. So didn't have an enormous amount of saliva. And but I thought, and I could feel it coming, and I was trying to make this sort of without being too obvious and look like I was sort of a vomiting cat. I had to sort of form a ball of biscuit in my mouth.
It's so disgusting.
It's so foul. Also, poor stage management in rehearsals. I had to put endless gobs of biscuit up off the floor. And then it became this spitting competition to see, because it was across the front of the Olivier stage. So I had to get it about
Good.
12, 13 foot across the stage. So then became a champion sort of biscuit splitter. But that was quite fun. I can't really think of anything else. I think for the most part, I've avoided it
And
because
what
it's
is
tricky.
what the drink always died? Water. I mean, that's the other thing about stage drinking is that
Oh yeah, yeah.
that's always just dyed water. So it's dyed whatever color it's
Yeah,
going to.
it's either watered down Coca-Cola or sort of blackcurrant juice or ginger ale. It's always good.
Ah,
Uh,
yeah.
or water with a tiny bit of food coloring in, depending on.
Yeah. One of my pet, actually, before we go on to the next question, one of my really pet hates, absolutely loads, is and I know why it's happened, but health and safety, you don't get glass on stage anymore. And so
Oh
you
yeah,
get that sort of melamine looking glass, or
yeah.
other brands may exist, but that kind of plastic glass. And what I loathe about it, and I can, obviously looks right, but I hate it when people put it down or they clink it and it doesn't make the glass sound. And it always, every time it happens, sort of takes me out of the play. I find it really irritating. And it's
Yeah.
such a tiny thing. And I wonder if you don't go to the theatre all the time, like whether it bothers you at all. But it really gets me. And it's very, it happens over and over again now. And when it first happened, I thought, oh, it was just one production that couldn't afford the, the breakage,
Yeah.
being particularly cautious. But now, obviously, everybody's brought it in. So it's obvious, I don't know. I find it odd. There is
It'd
so,
be great if you had like, you could feed that back into the props world, and they could make a melamine plastic style cup, but the top lip was glass.
yeah. So I made an,
So it's actually, if there was any breakage, it would be minimal, but you still got the clink.
yeah. Yeah. I mean, it takes me out every time. It takes me out of the play. It's very pathetic. Ask me about me and food. I'll tell you.
Do you like to write hungry or full, or do you snack?
I snack. So basically my you can tell how much I'm writing by how much weight I've gained. So that
Okay.
when when I used to for, a frighteningly long part of my journalistic career, I smoked. And as soon as I stopped smoking, then I found that food was a substitute in a sense. And not that I eat all the time or I eat massively all the time, but when I'm really, really concentrating, I find it incredibly hard to do it without having some kind of distraction, oral distraction. And we have this ongoing, now I'm a freelancer, of course, I'm writing all the time and really sort of concentrating. I have this kind of ongoing battle between me and my sons where I hide crisps. All this room is full. Instead of having bottles behind the books, there are snacks. And I hide
Yeah,
things. And then Augusta would hear all come in and either want to eat them themselves and do a lot of rummaging or
yeah.
say, Mom, so it's really hard, and I've really, really tried to address it because it isn't good for me and I shouldn't be doing it. And I've
Mm.
tried to substitute really healthy snacks. That's so at the moment I'm very into eating seaweed, but then I realized that I do interviews on Zoom or indeed in person, and I've got seaweed trapped around my teeth. So it's really disgusting, really. So it's constant issue for me.
Oh, that's hilarious.
So if on the subject of food, would you who would you do you have a list of people? People are always doing dream dinner parties.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
A list of people that you would actors that you would have at your dream party, a living or
Uh,
and indeed a menu. It's quite a good
a menu, I don't know. I'd have to think about that.
menu. Pasta.
I did have a very cool list and now I've completely lost it. So I'm sort of thinking on the hoof. I know I'd love to have met Joan Littlewood
Oh gosh, yes. Yeah,
and also Buzz Goodbody,
right.
who directed the Hamlet and then killed herself, didn't she?
Yes, yeah, yeah. Littlewood,
Extraordinary. Yeah,
yeah,
go on.
they're both extra. Well, they're both extraordinary pioneers, aren't they? I mean,
Yeah,
Littlewood, I realise, so influential still. I'm very interested when I do interviews, how many people saw her productions and how many people still talk about her. And
yeah,
yeah, yeah, she must have been an amazing figure, sort of setting up and being, so brave.
yeah,
Just saying, I'm going to do theatre differently and I'm going to let everybody come in.
yeah. It's
But
very funny. They
yeah,
were telling a joke on set yesterday, and I can't remember who the comedian was, but the joke was a woman walks into a bar, which is all right, and that's the joke. And it's so stupid, but everybody laughed,
yeah.
and it's sort of like I know it's a ghost of a misogyny. Oh, hang on. I'm sorry. It's the woman wanting to clean the room. I'm just going to tell.
We're well organised on this podcast.
Hello, so I'm still here. I'm just in a meeting. The meeting? Yeah, about maybe an hour. 1 hour? Is that okay? Thank you so much. Thank you. So sorry, it's very glamorous.
Emma's life.
I should have left the do not disturb thing. Sorry. Um,
Organized podcast.
but and that's just, and here we are in 2024, and people still laugh at that joke, even though it's a ghost of something.
Yeah. Yeah.
So my God, the world that they were creating in, how on earth?
Yeah.
Beyond extraordinary. I suppose it means that what I'm trying to say is that when we describe these women as extraordinary, the doors that they had to crash through,
Yeah.
the minds that they had to change, the ladders that they had to climb, the fights that they must have had every single day.
Yeah.
And then still, even with that, to have created something entirely new,
Yeah.
a genre that is still absolutely associated with their name.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
so I just think it's sort of, I don't think I had the brain to understand, because I had such privilege of being born at this time.
I think it's so interesting that I totally agree. And Littlewood's so fascinating because she was operating both as a woman and also about working class. I mean, you know, her whole thing was, you know, that the working classes had access to culture, and that idea of, you know, which everybody knows from Oh, What a Lovely War, that
Yeah,
use the culture that was seen as the working class culture, the culture of the music hall and of the end of the pier and of the end of the pier comic, to make theatre and therefore to welcome people in
yeah,
is just so astonishing, because it's the double thing of thinking that she as a woman could take on everybody, and then to actually address the culture of theatre,
yeah,
you know, to address the middle class drawing room and say, no, let's look at where, you know, British creativity comes from. I'm fascinated by the role of music hall and variety in British culture. I mean, I never, uh, growing up, because my own background is, I think, because my own background essentially is puritanical, if I, you know,
yeah,
religious terms, there was always a bit sort of slight worry about the music hall, and that
yeah,
it was slightly disreputable and um full of sort of nudge nudge wink wink bad
yeah,
behavior, really. And yet as I've got older, I've realized that did shut me off from something that was incredibly important culturally,
yeah,
and has, you know, huge impact in people like Morecambe and Wise, and, you know, the stuff that goes on and on even now. uh,
yeah. Well,
And
I think,
Littlewood was so much part of that. Oliver, of course, comes out of Littlewood. I mean, you know, it's just
yeah,
extraordinary what she did.
yeah, yeah. I think also that it is that thing of, we're such a sort of our arts culture, you know, for all the most magnificent reasons, is influenced globally, you know, and so what it is to be British, or to create something that is idio,
Syncretic.
idiosyncratically,
Yes, go. Yes,
idiosyncratically English, is
yes,
that a word?
yes. It'll go. Yes, it
Yes,
is.
keep going. It doesn't, it's not always obvious, or we have to remind ourselves, as you say, that that is, well, that's our history. That's
Yeah,
not, that's
exactly.
not influence. That's absolutely what was here before, you know, central television in the 1950s, or, you know, before we became, you know, officially a part of Europe, or when the empire was disbanded and we stopped, you know, thinking that we were the best thing since sliced bread, that we allowed the influence of all the best bits of the world to infiltrate our own. I think that it is interesting that thread is sort of fairly uninterrupted, isn't it, in terms of its place in culture, but it isn't always obvious where it sits
Yeah,
in amongst everything else. And also, you know, that where it led to, with the sort of the Goons and Monty Python, and that thread of the fallout after the war, that humor became entirely sort of eccentrically nonsensical
yeah, yeah,
as a reaction to the genocide of the Second World War. And I think it's really interesting to see it where it still sits,
yeah.
because there is such a sort of glorious mess of other influences.
Yeah, and there is there is that great sort of post-war generation of women who you kind of see. I always see them sort of marching along with furled umbrellas somehow. Um, because Lillian Bayliss down at the Old Vic, of course, was
Yeah,
doing a similar thing to. She wasn't an innovator in the same way that Littlewood was,
yeah,
but but she was also kind of desperate that working class people had access to theatre and ballet
yeah,
and opera, and determined, and just goes on, sort of knocking on doors and making things happen and changing lives. And it is, I'd quite like to meet Lillian Bayliss as well, because she's the founder of the effectively of the National Theatre, the Royal Ballet, and the National Opera, because that was.
really, I didn't know that.
Well, she is, because she's sort of the facilitator. She recruits de Valois, Ninette de Valois, to start running a dance company. She nags to get an English opera company off the ground. She commissions people like Britten.
Yeah,
And then because of the Old Vic, which she brought back from being a music hall to being a theatre, she
wow.
essentially paves the way for the National Theatre as well. So she's an astonishing sort of bolshy, interesting, difficult figure.
And
And I
was she sort of from a theatrical family, or did she
No,
have
I
money?
don't know, and I should know that. And I don't know the answer to that, because we're talking without our notes, and I haven't
I know,
just.
sorry, sorry. So who would you have?
I would have, so my dinner party, I think I would like, so I thought I should have some writers there.
Yeah,
I would have, well, they're all so interestingly, when I really did this list, just kind of, I could twist it and say things like, "Oh yeah, Lillian Bailey should be there," but actually, when I did it, just instantly, the five names I wrote down was, I'd like to have Stephen Sondheim, James Baldwin, Edward Albee, Anne Tyler, and George Eliot as writers. I mean, novelist dinner party, and
yeah,
I realized, well, not novelist, writers, but I realized what's bizarre about that is that four of them are American.
right.
And I think that is something that I feel, is that I am fascinated by British culture and British theatre and British writing, but actually what I read and what I'm sort of most strongly drawn to is American. I mean, so Albee and Sondheim, I would say, are the two people who most influenced me loving theatre to begin with, really.
Yeah,
I'll be oddly reading him, not and having this sense that he's so known for Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, and but having a sense that there were other plays, and particularly A Delicate Balance, which I took years to see. I did eventually see it with Eileen Atkins, but it took me a long time. And then I just love his work. I love that sense of heightened poeticism in his work. I would watch almost anything by Edward Albee, however artificial, however much it didn't work. Um, and I think there is a kind of kinship between him and Sondheim of the refinement of words and the refinement of using essentially, a prism of middle class life, of academic life, of um, yeah, young, successful, professional people lives to see things through. So I was interested in that of myself, and Baldwin's been my discovery in my later years. I've started to read Baldwin and realized that he was just so brilliant.
mm,
And Anne Tyler is the world's greatest comfort reading novelist who explains family life.
yeah,
So I love her, and yeah, and so I found that interesting to myself, and also that then when I wrote my list of sort of actors, the same thing more or less happens. So it's America, and I am, so the people, or at least it's not English. So my actor, my performer dinner party would be Richard Burton, who is the English exception, Rudolf Nureyev, who was why I loved everything from the very start, from ballet and culture, Sylvie Guillem, who's best fun to go out to dinner with in the world, and Catherine Hepburn, who heroin growing up. So that's
Mm.
another not English listener. There's something very strongly in my own cultural influences that isn't particularly British.
But
And I
maybe as well that they still have a sort of fantasy quality, because you as a journalist have had access to the most extraordinary personalities over the years. So maybe some of that has some of that feels more available. And
think
so, and the dream dinner party is it has to go to the sort of yeah, to a slightly more fantastical dreamlike status, maybe.
maybe, but I think it's also that I think what I love about I think it speaks of that. What I love about British culture is that it is quite welcoming to outside influences as well. That
Yeah,
I suppose because it had a strong sense of itself, that it could always welcome
yeah,
outside thinking. And I think that, and also I do have a sense, I think there's a bit of me as a person that just longs to be this sort of sophisticated Dorothy Parker figure sitting
you are, you are.
Oh no. And I think it's why I do love European theatre as well, because
Yeah,
I just like things that are, I don't know, challenging in a way. But it's always one of these games are always funny because you don't realize who you are till you write it down, in a sense.
yeah,
And then I
yeah.
can do a post hoc rationalization and do a completely different list. But that first list was that.
I
So,
tell you who I've always appears on my list quite a lot, and I saw him interviewed recently, but I think it must have been in a documentary, maybe about Coward. It was Daniel Massey.
oh, yes,
I've always, I always, from an early age, had the hots for him,
yes.
and even now, watching him, I just, I there's something about him. I mean, we've been talking a lot the last few days, and the way that actors do when they're sort of standing around and go for a drink or whatever, and about qualities of that certain actors have. And one of the actors in this job is described himself, or was described as, and repeated it because he quite liked it, was tickled by it. He called himself a nose putty actor.
Right.
He's basically a character actor. And then you get these other people who are not that, and for better or worse, may or may not be cast as sort of romantic parts according to their look, or sort of a bit more everyday person next door. But what they bring is a completely porous version of themselves to the screen or stage. So they just exist on stage. So they're not being required to osmose into something recognizable, as in the way that Meryl Streep does, or whatever. For me, he was just so gorgeous and accessible and ever so slightly fey, and but you just couldn't take your eyes off him.
No,
And
no.
then talking about this in this documentary, talking about his relationship with Coward, and obviously that quality that he had. There were all these older actors who was like, they sort of tenaciously said, yes, you're now part of this. So he found himself, even as a very, very young actor, with all these sort of legends.
Amazing people, yeah.
As an older actor, he had great anecdotes up his sleeve. And so he was talking about his relationship with Coward, who obviously just fancied the pants off him. But and because of his sort of mercurial quality, Coward felt comfortable enough to be very open with him, and
Mm.
maybe even slightly flirty. And but there's just it was something both enigmatic and open and everyday, which
Yeah.
is such an extraordinary combination. And I have always been fascinated by his work, and
Yeah, I didn't know
love
you.
to have met him.
I love him. I mean, I love him, and I mean, already we talked about him previous pod about the lines of Bernard Shaw, but
Yeah,
he's interesting, isn't he? Because I don't think he'd be anybody's sort of top list of most famous
yeah,
actor, but he was hugely significant, and I loved him so much. Everything I
yeah,
saw of him, and it
yeah.
is. You're right. It is that sense of absolute ease. I loved his sister as well. Anna Massey was one of, um, a
She's
daughter.
still here, though, isn't she? She's still here.
No, I don't think she is. No, I think she died a few years ago as well. Yeah. Yeah, I think so. I don't. I apologize if I've
No, I just
said that,
assumed
but yes. No.
it's on forever, but of course we don't.
What, do just do we already finished because if you may be able to hear, I'm not sure how much the microphone picks up, but in the background, my two sons are about to record a drum track, which is
Oh, okay.
really interesting.
Okay.
So I think you should you finish your list and then we'll call it a day for this week.
Well,
What else would you have? So you're allowed five people. So you've got it's already quite good. You've got Daniel Massey and you've got Joe Littlewood and Buzz Goodyear. Who else might you have? Two.
Hedy Lamarr,
Ooh, yes. Now you're talking.
because she was an extraordinary scientist.
Yeah,
And in fact, I don't know if I've got this right, but I think she contributed to inventing the effervescent tablet
right.
and something else extraordinary.
She did something in the war as well, wasn't she? A spy as
Yeah.
well. And she did something, she invented something for aircraft in the war.
Yeah. I
Yeah,
mean, she was sort of amazing, but also a goddess.
yeah,
And so did the acting really as sort of side hustle.
yeah.
But the most fascinatingly brilliant woman.
And a
Uh,
director. She directed films, didn't she?
yeah. Um, and to sit next to her at a table, I think would be absolute dream team.
Yeah, I'm pretty.
I really, really fascinating. I mean, Betty Davis is up there as well. Just in turn, it's the vanguards.
Yeah,
Every time it's the sort of really fiery, taking no shit vanguards who I would just, that would be pretty amazing. And
yeah.
there's lots of them and lots of them that we don't know enough about. And but you know, if we're going down to the final five, Daniel Massey and a few shit hot vanguards would be like,
That
I'd
would
be,
be very nice. I think I want to come to your dinner party. I think it might be more
thank you.
time, which is mine's a bit intellectual. I'll probably sit there and feel like the sort of lemon, well, all the well,
No. It would be
now we're
great.
exchanging bon mot. I think
Yeah.
that's something I would feel very sad. Yeah, but yes, maybe I'll just sit with Anne Tyler. I just finished with one thing that Anne
And
Tyler
Dorothy Parker. Yes.
and Dorothy Parker. But Anne Tyler, I asked her what she read because I'm always interested in what novelists read. And
Yeah.
she really didn't at this stage of her life, I think she's in her 80s now, read anything, but she did read The New Yorker from cover to cover every week. And I thought, yeah, that's good. I'd like that just to
Yeah.
that's my ambition. Whereas I spend the whole week doing the crossword and then sort of months reading it. I never managed to get through it, but it is the
There's a
great.
brilliant interview that I don't know if I've directed you to this before, but there was a brilliant interview with Katharine Hepburn that because she very, very rarely gave interviews. And there oh Christ, what's his name? He was a fantastic sort of 60s, 70s, maybe even early 80s American talk show host called Dick Cavett.
Dick Cavett, yeah, Cavett, yes, Dick
Oh,
Cavett.
Dick Cavett, who, you know, a lot of his interviews are available on YouTube, and he was immensely clever. And for whatever reason, Katharine Hepburn had been told by a friend that this guy was to be trusted, and that she finally agreed quite late in life to be interviewed by him on the proviso that there would be no live audience,
Right.
that she wouldn't have to dress up. And I can't remember what the other sort of riders were, but anyway, it's on YouTube. And it's fascinating because you can see when she turns up, she's a little bit abrupt and spiky and uncomfortable. And then throughout the interview, he just talks less and less and lets her just roll. And she sort of throws her shoes off and tucks her feet under her bum and then just starts talking.
Yeah.
She's not alone in as much as I think I've met lots of actors and read about lots of actors who feel that talking about themselves as who they are in the real world is immensely dull and would far rather be judged by their work, and have resisted the sort of celebrity culture as much as is possible. But of course, she herself is fascinating. And I read her biography recently, and I suspect she had OCD of some kind. She took about 8 baths a day
Right.
and really struggled without certain people in her life on a regular basis. And but also came from an incredibly academic literary family and grew up at a household that you weren't really allowed to sit at the dinner table unless you had something interesting to say.
Yeah.
And the story that I love about her, which again, I apologize if I've already told you, was that when this celebrity culture around the Hollywood studios was really in its embryonic stages, and the people who were under contract were being pushed to dress in a certain way and drive the right sort of cars and go to the right sort of parties. And she was like, I'm not doing this. This isn't my job. You can't make me do this.
Right.
And she would invariably turn up in dungarees and,
Black.
sneakers. And they were like, so basically one day she was on stage at one of the studios filming. She came back to her trailer, and her dungarees had been taken away, and there was some kind of sort of chic suit there for her to put on. So she walked around in her underpants all day until they brought them back. And I just think
Okay.
she was just endlessly fascinating
It was
and
just brilliant.
brilliant. But you
Was
must watch the
brilliant.
interview. It's
Yeah,
fantastic.
no, I will. And also, yeah, I realized that a lot of my guests or actually know one another because she was sometimes next door neighbor, wasn't she? Just
Yes.
I always think that, I mean, God, that must just been such a brilliant across the wall conversation.
I know. Years and years ago, I was doing a play with Michael Grandage, and he had been out in America sometimes because they were doing something together. I can't remember what, but he, like a child, and he was quite old at this point, but like a child, was like, come with me, come with me. And he took Grandage out into the garden and said, look, 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 look. And they were looking up at a window, and there was just somebody sat in a chair nodding their head.
Oh,
And it was because she had Parkinson's had really set in at that
yeah,
point.
yeah.
But it was just the fact that there was this sort of
God,
awe,
yeah, yeah.
awe around her goddess, and the fact that there she was at her most vulnerable, the sort of last point of her life.
Mm.
But someone as amazing as Sondheim was going, she's there,
Yeah, so much.
because just loved, absolutely loved.
Yeah, no, totally. Totally. We'll think on this. I'm going to look up what Lillian Baylis came from. I don't think she came from an arty family. I've got a feeling she came from.
But I'm fascinated where if you don't come from an arty family, or you don't have, I mean, at this time, at that time particularly, where does the sort of chutzpah and drive?
Oh, well, I've developed a new theory on that, but possibly it's the subject of next week's podcast. But my new theory is simply this, that actually, if you not coming from that and then suddenly being inspired is
Right.
actually helps you because it means you don't go any of the normal ways. I
Okay.
I've been talking to an American choreographer who I really love and admire. And I'm very struck, Trajel Harrell, and I'm very, very struck by the fact that because he didn't know the route, he made change. So he didn't he didn't quite know how to do what he wanted to do. And so he made his own way. And I think that often is the case, that as long as you've been inspired, as long as there's that moment where you go, oh my God, arts, culture are brilliant. They belong to me. They belong to everybody. Then I suspect that if we looked into the background of most of these people, that it was that inspiration, but then not knowing the way and therefore being true pioneers. Because
Yeah.
I think if it's too easy for you,
Yeah. Yeah.
and if you know which strings to pull, obviously you will succeed. That whole business about if you act at Eton or whatever, that you get there's an easier path.
Yeah.
It's easier, but you won't necessarily be a pioneer because you just follow the path that someone else had worn for you. Whereas if
Yeah.
you're really struggling to get there, you
Yeah. Yeah. That's interesting.
and I it's actually something that's interesting me more and more. So
Yeah.
we might return to Lillian next week. But for
Yeah.
now, before the drumming starts, shall we say
Yes. Okay. Okay. Shall I bring it to? Yes, I'll do the thing.
you bring it to a close?
We're so rubbish at this.
I know, absolutely shocking.
Well, thank you so much.
Yes.
And that's a goodbye from me, Nancy Carroll, the actress.
Then goodbye from me, Sarah Crompton, the
Yeah,
critic.
we did it. All right, darling.